So I'm thinking about Leslie Jones, and I'm thinking about what kind of place she must be in where she feels like her beauty doesn't fall on the spectrum. She talked about Lupita, and she says, okay, it's good. Lupita won, People's Most Beautiful award. And she's dark-skinned. That's a huge step. She's very dark-skinned. She has short, natural hair. That's a big step for us black girls. But what about those of us who don't necessarily, even though we may be dark-skinned and natural hair, what if we don't fit on that spectrum because we don't necessarily look like Lupita? Maybe our features are not as slender. Maybe our bodies are not as slender. Maybe we're not as friendly. Maybe we're not as accommodating as or as non-threatening as Lupita seems to be. What do you do then? What if your size doesn't match Lupita's size? What if your mannerisms don't match her mannerisms? I think this is a very fragile space, and I think that Leslie Jones feeling like she had to compare herself to a slave and talk about her usefulness definitely comes from a place of deep pain and definitely resentment, because even myself as a young girl, I remember being compared to a slave because of being dark-skinned, and I see where she's coming from. I'm not saying that I am agreeing with what she said and the joke that she made, but I'm trying to think about the larger pathology and where this joke came from. And I talked about the fact that we as black people have a tendency to joke at our pain and kind of laugh at our pain and be able to laugh it away. And I think that Leslie's self-deprecating tone really spoke to a deeper issue that I want to examine. Where is the space for people who may be dark but not necessarily do not necessarily fit into the parameters of a beauty that's even, say, Lupita's? One thing I'm noticing too on YouTube is there is a huge online community for black women, and the majority of the black women who are on YouTube are beauty bloggers, and what they're talking about now is natural hair, and they're talking about makeup and clothes and styling, and I definitely think it's an untapped market, finally a place where our beauty can be its own, have its own space. But even in the grand scheme of YouTube, you notice that the black beauty bloggers don't get nowhere near as much shine as, of course, the white beauty. Their beauty is validated. There's a huge market for it, and I think all of us as black women on YouTube are trying to find a way where our beauty is valid, and I think that is where Leslie Jones is coming from. She is darker skinned, she's very tall, she is heavier set, she's threatening, she's, because of her size and because of her demeanor, the way she portrays herself as a comedian, she seems like a very threatening presence, and so those are all things that she feels probably work against her and work against someone finding her beautiful. And I think that this is really a painful, dark place, and I think in reality it's where a lot of us are. It's where a lot of us we don't want to associate ourselves with that right now, but I really believe that that's where many of us are. I made a video a few weeks ago about the ugly friend, and being out with my friend, my best friend, who is very much lighter than me. She's skinny, she's tall, there were so many, and I was dealing with my vulnerable moment at that time of saying how, guys would pass us by, and it's always been that way with us ever since college. Guys would always stop and stare at her and give her compliments, and I was always like the one that was overlooked, but that was a very vulnerable place and a very honest place that I was coming from. And I think that all of us have a little bit of that in us, where we're in Leslie Jones' position, where we feel like there's nowhere that my beauty is appreciated. And she felt that so deeply that she felt the only way she could deal with that was to make herself a slave and make herself passed around from plantation to breed, and say, well, at least if I can't be beautiful, at least let me be useful. And it really makes me sad to think about that. I definitely think that's something that we need to examine and something that needs to be discussed.